The entire Israelite army was frozen. 40 days, 40 consecutive mornings, Goliath walked out onto the valley floor and issued his challenge. 40 consecutive mornings, trained soldiers, men with swords and spears and military experience, looked at that valley and did not move. Fear is a paralytic, and when it gets into a team, it spreads faster than any virus. Then a teenager arrived with sandwiches for his brothers. He smelled like sheep. He had no military rank. He had no military training on record, and within hours of arriving, he was standing over the body of the man who had paralyzed an army. But here is the question that nobody asks often enough. Why was David not afraid? Not, how did David win? That part is famous. The question is why he was the one person in that valley who did not see an impossible giant, who saw an opportunity. The answer is in the years before the valley. The years nobody was watching. The years that most people skip over when they tell this story. This video is about those years. Because whatever valley you are currently facing, whatever Goliath is standing in front of your progress right now, your ability to walk toward it rather than away from it was built before today. And if it has not been built yet, we need to talk about how to start building it right now. Stay with me. David lived in ancient Israel around 1040 to 970 BC. He was the 8th son of Jesse of Bethlehem, in a culture where birth order determined status that made him the least significant son in an already unremarkable family from an unremarkable town. Saul had been Israel's first king, a man described as head and shoulders above everyone else physically, who had been given the kingdom and had gradually squandered it through disobedience and insecurity. The prophet Samuel was sent to Jesse's house to anoint the next king. Jesse brought 7 sons before Samuel. God rejected all 7. Then Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse almost forgot to mention David. He was out with the sheep. That detail alone tells you everything about how David was perceived by the people closest to him. He was the afterthought, the one nobody considered. And yet Samuel looked at him and heard from God. "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." The story of Goliath and the Valley of Elah, set approximately 1025 BC, happened before David had any formal position. He was still functioning primarily as his father's shepherd boy and occasionally as Saul's personal musician, summoned to play when Saul's dark moods descended. The Philistines were the dominant military power in the coastal region of ancient Canaan. They had iron weapons, a significant technological advantage over the Israelites who were still primarily working in bronze. Goliath was their champion, described in the Hebrew text as somewhere between 6.5 and 9 feet tall, wearing armor weighing approximately 60 kilograms, with a spear shaft like a weaver's beam and an iron point weighing 7 kilograms. He had been making this challenge for 40 days. "Send me your champion. We fight. Winner takes all." No one in Israel moved. And then David arrived with food for his brothers and heard the challenge for the first time. David's response to hearing Goliath's challenge is instructive before a single stone is thrown. He began asking questions, not out of fear, out of genuine curiosity. He asked, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine? What will be done for someone who removes this disgrace?" His oldest brother Eliab overheard him asking and became angry. He accused David of abandoning the sheep just to come and watch the battle, of conceit and wickedness. There was contempt in the way Eliab spoke to him. It was the contempt of a man who had been passed over by God in favor of his youngest brother, and who had never quite forgiven either of them. David's response to Eliab is a masterclass in emotional regulation under criticism. "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" He turned away and kept asking the same questions. He did not stop because someone dismissed him. He did not alter his curiosity because someone questioned his motives. He had internal clarity that external opposition could not redirect. The report of David's questions reached Saul, who summoned him. In front of the king, David said, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul said, "You are just a youth, and he has been a warrior from his youth." And now David revealed something critical. He did not argue about Goliath. He gave a track record instead. He said, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This was not boasting. This was evidence. He was showing Saul that this moment was not his first impossible confrontation. He had been in situations like this before. He had won before. His confidence was not arrogance, it was a track record. And then he said something that Saul could not argue with. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul gave him permission to go, and then tried to dress him in his own armor, royal armor, adult armor, military armor. David put it on and could barely walk. He took it off. He said, "I cannot go in these. I am not used to them." He picked up his staff. He went to a stream and chose 5 smooth stones. He put them in his shepherd's pouch, and he walked toward Goliath with his sling in his hand. Goliath saw him coming and was insulted. He said, "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David's response is one of the most powerful declarations of conviction in all of ancient literature. He said, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." He ran toward the Philistine, 1 stone from the sling. Goliath fell forward. David ran, stood over him, took Goliath's own sword, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the Israelite army, that had been frozen in fear for 40 days, pursued them. The paralysis broke the moment one person walked toward the giant instead of away from it. David went on to serve in Saul's court. He became Saul's armor-bearer. He led military campaigns and won consistently. His popularity with the people grew, and Saul began to feel threatened. Saul tried to kill him multiple times. David fled into the wilderness. He lived in caves. He gathered a band of men described as distressed, in debt, and discontented. He led them. He built them into a fighting force. He refused twice to kill Saul, even when Saul was alone and vulnerable, because Saul was still the anointed king. Eventually, Saul died in battle. David was anointed king over Judah first, then 7 years later over all of Israel. He conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He planned the temple that Solomon would build. He was also, in his own life, deeply flawed. His affair with Bathsheba, his orchestration of Uriah's death on the battlefield, the dysfunction of his own household, these were real failures with real consequences. The Bible does not airbrush them. It records them in detail. He was called a man after God's own heart, not because he was perfect, but because he was relentlessly honest with God about his imperfections. He sinned, confessed, suffered consequences, and returned. The cycle of his spiritual life is deeply human, and he died having established the most significant kingdom in Israelite history, having written some of the most enduring poetry in human literature, and having set up the conditions for his son Solomon's extraordinary reign. Leadership value. What leadership value applies to us today? What does David teach us about leadership? Leadership Principle 1. Private victories build public capability. The lion and the bear. Nobody saw those fights. There was no audience in the wilderness when David wrestled a lion for a sheep. Nobody applauded when he survived the bear. It was just David, the animal, and a choice about whether to run or engage. Those private victories were the training ground for the public victory. The confidence David brought to the valley of Elah was not manufactured in that moment. It was accumulated over years of confronting fear in private, winning in private, and building an internal evidence base that said, "I have done hard things before. I can do this." This is the most important leadership development insight in this entire video. You cannot borrow confidence. You have to build it, and you build it in the wilderness, in the unsexy, unwitnessed moments where you choose engagement over avoidance. Every leader who walks into a high-stakes board meeting, investor pitch, or crisis without flinching has a wilderness behind them. moments of private preparation and private pressure that built the visible composure. Leadership Principle 2. Define your own weapons. Do not wear someone else's armor. Saul's armor was not wrong. It was wrong for David. It was built for a different body, a different fighting style, a different combat approach. David tried it on, assessed it honestly, and took it off. He went with what he knew: his sling, his stones, his technique. In leadership terms, this is one of the most common and destructive mistakes: copying someone else's leadership style wholesale. Your leadership effectiveness comes from a deep understanding of your own strengths and the willingness to build systems and teams around those strengths rather than cramming yourself into a model designed for someone else. Leadership Principle 3. One person's courage breaks the paralysis of the whole team. The entire Israelite army was frozen. Not because they could not fight, they were trained soldiers. They were frozen because no one had broken the inertia yet. No one had been the first. David walked toward the giant, and an entire army unfroze. They pursued. They won. In every team and every organization, there are giants that everyone can see and nobody is walking toward. Leadership is the willingness to walk toward the thing that everyone is looking at and nobody is addressing. Not recklessly, not without preparation, but with the deliberate, evidence-based courage that says, "This is possible. We can do this. Watch." Leadership Principle 4. Maintain your integrity when you have power over the powerless. David had two opportunities to kill Saul. Saul was actively hunting him. David had every practical reason to remove the threat. Both times, he refused. The leaders who are trusted with the most are the ones who are known for how they behave when no one can stop them. That reputation is built in the moments of private power over others. Wealth-building value. What wealth-building value does this story show us? David's wealth-building story is distinct from Solomon's. It is the story of how resources are accumulated through military and political strategy, and how the environment for extraordinary wealth is prepared even when you do not get to enjoy it yourself. Wealth Principle 1. Build the foundations that others will build on. David wanted to build the temple. God told him no because David was a man of war, and the temple was to be built in a time of peace by a man of peace. So Solomon would build it. David's response was not sulking or withholding. He spent the rest of his reign accumulating the resources for what he would not live to build. He collected gold, silver, bronze, iron, timber, and stone in enormous quantities. He recruited craftsmen. He drew up the architectural plans. When Solomon built the temple, he was building on a foundation David had spent decades laying. The wealth principle is profound. Your most significant contribution may be to the generation that follows you, not your own. The infrastructure you build, financial, relational, institutional, educational, that others will build on long after you are gone is not wasted effort. It is generational investment. Wealth Principle 2. Loyalty to your community generates long-term economic power. David's years in the wilderness, protecting the farmers and livestock owners of the regions he moved through, built a network of obligation and loyalty that eventually supported his kingship. When he was crowned, it was not primarily through military conquest. It was through the accumulated goodwill of people whose lives he had protected when he had nothing to gain from doing so. The principle is ancient and unchanging. The most durable economic relationships are built on genuine value exchange, not transactional extraction. Build your reputation in your community by adding value before you need anything in return. That investment of goodwill compounds at an extraordinary rate. Wealth Principle 3. Emotional resilience is a financial asset. David's Psalms reveal someone who processed extremely difficult emotional experiences: fear, betrayal, grief, guilt, rage, despair, with extraordinary honesty, and then returned to functional capacity. This is not a side note in a wealth discussion. The research on high-net-worth individuals consistently identifies emotional resilience, the ability to process setbacks without prolonged dysfunction, as one of the most significant predictors of long-term financial success. Not intelligence, not education, not even network. The people who build lasting wealth are the people who can lose significant resources and not lose themselves. David lost his first child. He lost his kingdom temporarily when his son Absalom staged a rebellion. He lost his closest friends to battle and to time, and he came back. Every time. Emotional resilience is not a personality trait. It is a developed capacity, and it is worth investing in as deliberately as any financial skill. Boardroom value. What boardroom value can we extract from this story? From the boardroom perspective, David gives us extraordinary material. Boardroom Lesson 1. Assess the problem fresh. Do not inherit the fear culture. David arrived at the battlefield and assessed it himself. He asked his own questions. He sought his own information. He did not simply absorb the prevailing interpretation that Goliath was undefeatable, because that interpretation came from people who had been staring at the problem for 40 days while getting more afraid. 40 days of institutional fear had produced institutional paralysis. David, who arrived without that history, saw what the veterans could no longer see. A large man with heavy armor and a slow reaction time, up against a projectile weapon that could reach him before he could reach the thrower. The boardroom application. When you join an organization, inherit a team, or acquire a business, be cautious about immediately adopting the incumbent interpretation of the competitive landscape. Fear cultures in organizations define what is possible based on what has been failed at before. Fresh eyes often see competitive advantages that familiarity has rendered invisible. Boardroom Lesson 2. The evidence-based pitch is the one that gets the yes. David did not walk into Saul's throne room and say, "I have a feeling this will work." He gave specific, verifiable evidence. The lion, the bear, the outcomes. He demonstrated that this was not his first high-stakes confrontation. He showed a pattern of success against impossible odds. Before any significant organizational decision, the leaders who win the room are the ones who come with evidence. Not just projections. Evidence. Prior results in analogous situations. Historical precedent. Verifiable indicators that the proposed action has a rational basis. Build your track record before you need it. Document your wins. Know your evidence before the conversation starts. Boardroom Lesson 3. Recognize when the incumbent armor does not fit your organization. In boardrooms, this manifests as the pressure to adopt industry-standard approaches, to follow the strategic playbook that worked for the last successful company in your space. Sometimes those approaches are exactly right, and sometimes they are armor designed for a different body. The leadership question before any major strategy adoption is, does this fit us? Does it align with our specific capabilities, our culture, our customer, our market position? Not, is this the correct armor theoretically? But, can we walk in it? Boardroom Lesson 4. Succession crises are preventable. David's example and counterexample. David prepared extraordinary material resources for Solomon's succession. But he did not prepare Solomon politically or emotionally for the complexity of governing. David got the material succession right and the human succession incomplete. The lesson for boards. Succession planning must address both dimensions. The financial and operational transition and the human dimension. Who is the next leader becoming? What experiences are they being given? A succession plan that only addresses the business assets is missing the most critical element. 3 questions to take away. Question 1. What is your lion and bear? And are you fighting them? Your private victories are being built or not built right now. The habits you are forming or not forming. The disciplines you are maintaining or avoiding. The small confrontations with your own fear or discomfort that you are choosing or refusing. Those private decisions are building or failing to build. The confidence that will carry you into your valley of Elah when it arrives. The giant is coming. What you do in the wilderness before it arrives determines everything about how you face it. Question 2. Whose armor are you wearing and does it fit? Be honest about this. Where in your professional or personal life are you performing using a model, framework, or approach that was designed for someone else? Where are you trying to succeed using someone else's strategy when your own natural capabilities, your sling, your stones, your specific skill, would be far more effective? Question 3. What is the giant that your team is currently looking at and nobody is walking toward? Every organization has one. The conversation that needs to happen. The structural change that everyone knows is necessary. The competitor who is gaining ground that nobody wants to acknowledge in public yet. What would it take for you to be the person who walks toward it? The giant fell the moment one person moved. If this video gave you something to work with, share it. Drop it in a group chat, send it to a leader in your network, tag someone who needs the David story today. Subscribe to the Bible Wealth channel. Every single week we go this deep. One story, full historical context, leadership principles, wealth principles, and boardroom lessons extracted, explained, and applied to the modern world. Hit the bell and tell me in the comments, what is your current Goliath? What is the giant you have been looking at and not yet walking toward? Let us talk about it. Next week, Esther, and how a woman in a Persian palace negotiated the most consequential deal in her people's history using emotional intelligence, timing, and strategic restraint that still belongs in every boardroom training program. See you then.